Hey YouTube. If you can give the Old Testament one thing, it's consistent. This is Numbers chapter 30. I'm going to read the whole thing, 16 verses. It's talking about vows. Then Moses said to the heads of the tribe of the Israelites, "This is what the Lord has commanded. When a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." Okay. When a woman makes a vow to the Lord, or binds herself by a pledge while within her father's house in her youth, and her father hears of her vow or her pledge by which she has bound herself, and says nothing to her, then all her vows shall stand, and any pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father expresses disapproval to her at the time that he hears of it, no vow of hers and no pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. And the Lord will forgive her because her father had expressed to her his disapproval. Because the daughters are the father's property, so they're the sole arbiter. Not God, not priests, but the father. And having a foolish vow negated by the father requires forgiveness. Let's continue. If she marries, while obligated by her vows or any thoughtless utterance of her lips by which she has bound herself, and her husband hears of it and says nothing to her at the time that she hears, then her vows shall stand, and her pledges by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if, at the time that her husband hears of it, he expresses disapproval to her, then he shall nullify the vow by which he was obligated, or the thoughtless utterance of her lips by which she bound herself, and the Lord will forgive her. So again, the transfer of the woman property, from one owner, the father, to the other owner, the husband, who again, is the sole arbiter of what's considered a foolish vow or not, and whether she needs to be forgiven for being so stupid. Continuing. But every vow of a widow or of a divorced woman by which she has bound herself shall be binding upon her. At least they got that, huh? Since they're not anybody else's property. And if she made a vow in her husband's house, or bound herself by a pledge with an oath, and her husband heard it and said nothing to her, and did not express disapproval to her, then all her vows shall stand, and any pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her husband nullifies them at the time that he hears them, then whatever proceeds out of her lips concerning her vows, or concerning her pledge of herself, shall not stand. Her husband has nullified them, and the Lord will forgive her. Any vow or any binding oath to deny herself, her husband may allow to stand, or her husband may nullify. But if her husband says nothing to her from day to day, then he validates all her vows or all her pledges by which she is obligated. He has validated them because he said nothing to her at the time that he heard of them. But if he nullifies them sometime after he has heard of them, then he shall bear her guilt. That is an interesting way to end this passage, because it's talking about the husband bearing the guilt of foolish vows made by the wife. Now, this kind of relates to the story of Jephthah in Judges chapter 19, where he vows that if the Lord gives him success in battle, that when he comes back, whoever comes out of his house to greet him, meaning somebody who is a piece of his property, that he made a vow, to offer them as a burnt offering. And his daughter, comes out of the house, and he ends up offering her as a burnt offering. Why did he do that? Because he didn't want to bear the guilt of making a foolish vow. So that shows how much of a coward he was. These are the statutes that the Lord commanded Moses concerning a husband and his wife, and a father and his daughter while she is still young and in her father's house.